October 2009. The remote mountains of southeastern Oklahoma. A family of 3 drives up a rough mountain road to look at a piece of land. A husband, a wife, their 6-year-old daughter. They never come back down. Their truck is found abandoned at the end of the road, the engine able to start, the doors closed. Inside are their phones, their wallet, their dog, and a large sum of cash. On a camera in that truck is a photograph of the little girl taken hours before they vanished. It would be 4 years before anyone found them in the autumn of 2009. The Jamison family lived in the state of Oklahoma. In the United States, they were a family of 3, and their names matter, because every cold case begins with names. Bobby Jamison was the father. He was in his 40s. Sherilyn Jamison was the mother. She was in her 40s as well. And Madison Jamison, their daughter, their only child, was 6 years old by the autumn of 2009. The Jamison family was, by various accounts, a household under some strain. There were difficulties in their lives. The ordinary and less ordinary pressures that a family can carry, and the family had an idea that they hoped might be a fresh start. They were interested in buying land in a remote part of southeastern Oklahoma, in the mountains, in a rugged, forested, sparsely populated area. The idea, broadly, was a move, a change, a place of their own, away from the difficulties of where they were. On the 8th of October 2009, the Jamison family set out to drive up into those mountains and look at a particular piece of property. It should have been a short trip, a few hours, a drive up a mountain, a look at some land, and a drive back down. It was the last time Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison Jamison were ever seen alive. The land the Jamisons went to see was in a genuinely remote area, southeastern Oklahoma. In that region is mountainous and heavily forested. The roads are rough. The terrain is rugged. It is the kind of country where homes are far apart, where cell signal is unreliable, and where a person can be genuinely out of reach. The Jamisons drove up one of those rough mountain roads. On the 8th of October 2009, what is known of their movements comes from a few sources, from the physical evidence later found in and around their truck, from what investigators could piece together of their final hours. And one of those sources is genuinely haunting. There was a camera with the family, and on that camera was a photograph. The photograph showed Madison, the 6-year-old daughter. It had been taken, investigators determined, in the hours before the family vanished. One of the last images, perhaps the last image, of the child taken on that mountain that day. The photograph would later become one of the most discussed pieces of the entire case, in part because of its timing, and in part because of how ordinary and how final it was. At the same time, after that photograph was taken, the trail of the Jamison family goes almost completely dark. When the Jamison family did not return, concern grew. Within a few days, the search for them began, and it led to the mountain road they had driven up. At the end of that road, investigators found the family's truck, and the condition of the truck is the foundation of the entire mystery. The truck was empty. Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison Jamison were not in it, and not anywhere immediately around it, but almost everything else was. Inside the truck, investigators found the family's dog, alive, though it had been shut in the vehicle. For days, they found the family's mobile phones. They found identification and personal belongings. And they found money. A significant amount of cash, by the accounts that have come down. Thousands of dollars left inside the vehicle. Think about what that means. A family does not walk away from a truck on a remote mountain voluntarily, going somewhere they intend to come back from, and leave behind their phones, their identification, their dog, and thousands of dollars in cash, and a robber. An obvious motive in a lonely place does not leave thousands of dollars sitting in the truck. There were other details that investigators noted, details that, over the years, have been discussed endlessly. Among the items connected to the family was a letter of a personal and troubling nature. By some accounts, there was a book of an unusual kind in the vehicle. Each of these details has been spun over the years into a different theory, but the core fact sat there at the end of that road. From the very first day, a family of 3 had gone up a mountain and had stepped away from their truck, leaving behind every single thing a person needs to survive, to communicate, and to come home. And then the mountain simply closed over them once the truck was found. The search for the Jamison family became enormous. The terrain, though, was the enemy of the search. The mountains of southeastern Oklahoma, in that region, are rugged, densely wooded, and difficult to move through. A search across that kind of country is slow, hard, and uncertain, even with many people, aircraft, and dogs. And the search was extensive. Ground teams, air searches, tracking dogs. The area around the truck was searched and searched again. The searches found nothing. No sign of Bobby Jamison. No sign of Sherilyn Jamison. No sign of 6-year-old Madison. Tracking dogs, by some accounts, struggled to establish a clear, followable trail leading away from the truck, which only deepened the strangeness. If the family had simply walked off into the woods and become lost, there might have been a direction, a trail, a scent leading somewhere. Instead, it was as though the family had stepped out of the truck and out of the world in the same motion. Weeks passed, then months. The active search could not continue forever. The case settled into the long, hard category of a missing persons mystery, with no scene, no trail, and no answer. Theories, meanwhile, multiplied. Had the family met someone on that mountain? Had they been the victims of a crime? Had something gone wrong within the family itself? Had they, for some reason, walked into the wilderness on purpose? Every theory had its supporters. Every theory had its holes. And for 4 years, the mountains of southeastern Oklahoma did not give up a single answer. In November of 2013, more than 4 years after the Jamison family disappeared, the case changed. 2 hunters were out in the mountains of that same remote region of southeastern Oklahoma, and in the woods, some distance from where the family's truck had been found, they came upon human remains. Investigators recovered 3 sets of remains from the site. They were, in time, identified as Bobby Jamison, Sherilyn Jamison, and their daughter, Madison, after more than 4 years. The central question of the case, where the Jamison family had gone, finally had an answer. They had not been taken to some distant place. They had been in those mountains, all along, in the wilderness, not far in the end, from where their journey had stopped, but finding the Jamison family did not solve the case because of the length of time. The remains had been exposed in the wilderness more than 4 years through 4 cycles of seasons. The condition of the remains was extremely limited, and that meant that the central forensic question, how the 3 members of the Jamison family had died, could not be clearly answered. Investigators could confirm that the family had been found. They could confirm the identities, but the cause of death, the single fact that might have told investigators whether this was a crime, an accident, an act within the family, or something else, had been taken by the 4 years. The mountain had held them with the Jamison family found, but the cause of death unknown. The case became a debate, and the debate has run for more than a decade. One broad line of thinking holds that the family died as the victims of a crime, that someone encountered them on that mountain, that the family's deaths were the result of another person's actions. In this reading, the abandoned truck, the untouched cash, the dog left inside, all point to an encounter that went catastrophically wrong, and the wilderness then hid the result. A second line of thinking looks inside the family. The Jamison household, as we have heard, was under strain. Some theories propose that the deaths arose from within the family itself. A third line of thinking considers misadventure, that the family, for some reason, left their truck and went into the wilderness, and that, in that rugged terrain, in that remote country, they were overtaken by the mountain itself, by exposure, by the simple, unforgiving difficulty of being lost in a hard place. Each theory explains some of the facts. None of them explains all of them, and the reason the debate cannot be settled is the same reason it began. The cause of death is unknown. Without it, there is no fact at the center of the case to anchor any theory, no finding that says this was violence, or this was the cold, or this was something the family did. The strange items connected to the case, the troubling letter, the unusual book, the family's documented difficulties have all been pulled into the theories, but strange details are not the same. As proof, the Jamison family was found, but the question of what happened to them on that mountain came back down exactly as open as it went up. The Jamison family left behind an extended family, relatives who spent 4 years not knowing where Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison had gone, and who then received the hardest possible answer for those relatives. The discovery in 2013 ended one agony and began another. The not knowing was over. The family had been found. They could be brought home. They could be laid to rest. But the why was not over. The how was not over. The family had been returned without the one thing that might have brought peace, an explanation. And there is a particular detail in this case that has stayed with people more than almost any other. It is the photograph, the image of Madison, the 6-year-old, taken on that mountain in the hours before the family disappeared. In most cases, in this archive, the last record of a missing person is a witness account, a sighting, someone's memory. In the Jamison case, there is an actual photograph, a real image, taken by the family themselves from inside their own last day. It is a window directly into the final hours of 3 people, and it shows, heartbreakingly, nothing wrong at all. A child A mountain, an ordinary moment, photographed by people who had no idea it was the end. If Jamison had lived, she would be a young woman now, in her 20s. But, like so many, in these files, she is fixed in time, a 6-year-old, in a photograph on a mountain. On the last day anyone saw her family alive, more than 15 years after the Jamison family vanished, and more than a decade after they were found, the case remains unsolved. It is, in one sense, a recovered case. The family is no longer missing. They were found. They were identified. They were brought home, but in the sense that matters most to an investigation, the sense of what actually happened, the case is as unsolved as it has ever been. The obstacles are severe, and many of them are permanent. The cause of death could not be determined. The scene was the open wilderness across 4 years of seasons. The physical evidence that a normal investigation would rely on was lost to time and exposure. What endures is the shape of it: a family of 3, a truck at the end of a mountain road, phones, identification, a dog, and a large sum of cash left behind. A final photograph of a 6-year-old child, and 4 years of silence before the mountain gave the family back. We may never know what happened to Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison Jamison on that mountain in October of 2009. We may never know whether they met someone, or whether something happened among them, or whether the wilderness alone took them, but we know they drove up that road. We know they stepped away from everything they needed. We know they were close all along, and that the mountain kept its reasons for 4 long years, and that, for as long as cold cases are remembered, is what keeps the file open, even when the missing are finally found. Chalkline file doesn't promise you answers. Sometimes the file stays open, even after the missing come home. A family of 3 drove up a mountain road in Oklahoma in October of 2009 to look at a piece of land. A husband, a wife, and a 6-year-old girl. They never came back down. What we have, more than 15 years later, is a truck full of everything they needed. A last photograph of a child. 3 sets of remains found after 4 years. And a cause of death, the wilderness erased. If you know something the file does not, a name, a recollection, a story carried in a family from someone who was in those Oklahoma mountains in October of 2009. Every detail still matters. Even now, even 15 years on, cold cases stay cold until they don't. This was the Jamison family file. Subscribe for more case files from the Deep Archive. Some of them have answers. Most of them are still waiting.